All right, guys, time for more match lessons from Rocky Mountain. This one is partly on bags, partly on bipods, all open division or at least some modified division stuff. So on this stage here, I ended up using a bag and a bipod, and I'm going to scroll back all the way to the beginning of the stage so you can look at my setup here. So this is what I had going on. I had a fairly large bag, and the reason I did that is I was going to shoot across a spool with my bipod collapsed and my bag on the spool, and I wanted to make sure I had enough height in my bag that my bipod did not touch the spool. A couple other things, you can see my bipod is basically all the way extended. The reason I did that is the position I was going to shoot from with the bipod was a very awkward position, and if you saw the early messing up a bipod video, you'll know that a longer bipod is better than a shorter bipod if you make a mistake. You can work around a longer bipod, you really can't work around a bipod that's too short. The other thing, other thing, is that the left leg of my bipod is longer than the right leg on my bipod. And so when you go down to the position where I'm going to shoot the bipod from, is right here, you will see it is slanted downwards to the left. My head or my rifle is lower than the rest of my body. It's a pretty awkward spot, and that's the reason I did all those things. So my bipod is very long to help me accommodate all that, and the left leg of my bipod is longer than the right leg to help me get my rifle as level as possible before I get into that position. The shots aren't super long. I think this was like 200-ish yards on some 6 or 8 inch plates. But you don't want any more cant than you absolutely have to have. So then I moved to the spool, and when I moved to the spool, I collapsed my bipod and I got out of the sling. And I did both of those things for a couple reasons here. Reason number one, I collapsed my bipod because obviously I didn't want it touching the table if I was going to shoot off of my bag. And the reason I chose the bag over the bipod for this spool was if you were in the middle of the spool where you could, reasonably use a bipod, so you could support the rear of the rifle on the spool as well. You were too far right and you were kind of shooting through a bush at one of the targets, and I didn't want to have any real obstruction vision-wise. So I opted for the bag. It was a pretty solid double kneel position on the left edge there, but I needed to collapse that bipod out of the way. Now, the reason I got out of the sling is as you leave this position and you go into the last position here, it's a little bit of an awkward entry into the position around these little rocks, and then the position itself is very low. And it looks like I wouldn't have had any problems, but I was a little bit concerned that I would maybe, the sling would come tight around my neck, get into this weird position, and it would cause some problems with entry here. So this is another reason why I ran a very large bag relative to my other one. Is this position was very low, even for a short guy like me, and a larger bag just gives you a little bit more height. So the last thing I want to touch on is where the bag was mounted. So if you're running a bag and a bipod, you can basically run the bag either all the way forward, right up against the bipod, or you can run it all the way back. I chose all the way back, and I didn't really have a super good reason for that, other than it seemed like the right move at the time. It let me mount my bipod a little bit more rearward so I could reach it to deploy it initially and then recollapse it. But I don't think there was really any rhyme or reason to it, other than it seemed like a better way to go. All the way forward would have also been totally fine. You just need to make sure that your bipod and your bag play nice. But all of this worked out. This turned out to be a stage win for me. And I find that, generally speaking, if I'm choosing a bipod or a bag for an obstacle, I will usually choose the bag because you can mess up more. It's a little bit faster to get in position, and bipods, for whatever reason, on some obstacles don't tend to play nice. Like there's a spool on this obstacle right here. This is on the previous stage, and I shot just the bag here. And the reason that I shot just the bag on this spool, you can see all of the holes in the spool. So if you get into this with a bipod, it's a very solid position, but you had to make like a 90-degree turn at one point. So right there, you had to make that big turn to shoot at different targets. Now, obviously making that turn with a bipod is way harder if your bipod legs are down in the holes on this spool. So this is an example where I could basically go with either the bipod or a bag, and I chose the bag because it was just easier to work with, and it was, totally fine in the circumstance. Want one for one, easy shooting, nice and solid. So if you are choosing between a bipod and a bag, think very hard about the bag if there's any real weirdness to the prop that you're shooting off of. And if you're shooting a bipod with a bag, make sure that the bag is tall enough that you can support off of whatever barricade you need to support off of with your bipod collapsed, so the main body of the bipod does not touch the barricade that you're on.